everybody. Thank you for being here. This is going to be really fun, and I hope it really stimulates some thoughts in your minds. And I did not know that Bob already had such a familiarity with something I'm going to be talking about here today, which is called the Urantia Book. And we'll have a little bit of a lead up to that. But I really do want to give a lot of thanks to Bob and to Jordan Pease here. Jordan being a very long-term and dear friend of mine. When they first contacted me and said, hey, we'd like to invite you to come down and speak at this conference, I said, well, okay, what would you like me to speak about? And they said, well, breakthrough energy technologies, like you usually talk about at conferences. And I thought about it for a second and just kind of checked in and said, you know, I don't want to talk about that this time. I think there's something much more important for me to speak about. And when I told them what it was, Jordan said, well, let me check with Bob. And then Bob came back and said, wow, that's great, that's perfect, love it. So here I am. So I think that we're going to have something that should be of great interest to you. And there's a possibility here to bring a lot of the topics that we've been hearing about all week together. And I've been so stimulated by all of the presentations that I've heard, because these little synchronicities and things kept popping up where I think there's some extra insight that can be brought to the researchers that we've heard here. So my background is as a scientist, and I'm very much a feet on the ground, data-driven type of person. I've worked primarily in the chemical industry, in the pulp and paper, and the water treatment industries. And I've been an inventor of technologies that are commercially successful technologies used in those industries. And I travel around widely, spent a lot of time in South America earlier on. Now it's mostly in the United States and Canada. So I travel around a lot, met a lot of scientists over my lifetime, a lot of really, really excellent scientific minds. And yet I've often had questions that have been uncomfortable to ask in the presence of mainstream scientists and academia. And I think you'll see what I mean as we get into this a little bit. Why is a scientist up there talking about religion? It's a trigger word for so many of us. And it's like, oh no, don't talk about something churchy or anything like that. And I promise I won't. So, there are conventional definitions of religion that you can just, Google it, see what it has to say about that. Here's the one that maybe most people are most familiar with: the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal God or gods. And I think that's where people bring in the church aspect to it, that a lot of people feel, oh, I want to stay away from that, maybe because they had a really bad experience. Second one, a particular system of faith and worship. Okay, kind of a little bit similar, but a little more watered down from the first. But the next here, which I think has been very apropos for what we've heard here in all these other presentations, a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance. Now, that might mean that your religion might be pursuing out-of-body experiences. It might be pursuing artifacts around the world, investigating ancient history. It might be, pursuing conspiracy theories. If you live in Canada, it might be hockey. If you're out in the lobby on the first floor of this building, it might be smoking cigarettes and putting in a lot of effort into slot machines. All right, so there's lots of ways we could consider ourselves religious, but I believe that I've come up with a better definition of religion. And it's this: the personal and individualized embrace of knowledge and effort directed toward understanding and successfully navigating reality. That's my definition. And this came into my mind 2 days ago as I was trying to harmonize what a good definition of religion is that would also embrace what we've heard here this week. So reality is in capitals. Why is that? Well, it's because it's the desire to go toward what's at the center of everything, from which everything proceeds. Call it God, Spirit, the One, however we want to think about that. But the pursuit of that central wisdom is what I think is at the heart of religion. And I think that's what all the researchers, investigators, and experiencers are on their journey toward. So this will be a little bit about my personal journey. And like so many of you, I've been hungry for answers to the big questions here. What's the origin of the universe and life? What's the history of our planet and our civilization? What's the destiny for humanity and each of us personally? Who or what is God? What's our relationship to that being? What happens when we die? And are we alone in the universe, which has been pretty much the thread through this whole conference here. Now, what I have found, and I think so many of you have found, is that conventional science and religion and philosophy simply do not adequately address these big questions. And from my perspective, it's largely been because they're incomplete, inconsistent, and incoherent. And the last part, that word incoherent, is that they really don't make sense. They break down at some level, which just is not intellectually satisfying or perhaps spiritually satisfying. Now, I myself grew up in a very devout Catholic family, and I'm very grateful for what is true and beautiful and good in Catholicism, because much of it is. But from the time of being a little boy, and I was the one always in the back of the class, sometimes in the front, asking the nuns who taught me, and the priests at times, some really tough questions for them. And I know they would have just preferred I'd shut up, okay? But I've always had this hunger. Now, you know, despite what I did learn that I believe has some truth in it, you know, there's a lot of doctrinal matters, issues of dogma that I really very much disagree with because it didn't make sense to me. And then, of course, there have been some real betrayals in that particular institution, as there have been in many others, that really broke hearts. I'm motivated by certain things that I see out in our world that I think a lot of you have observed as well. We have a lot of problems, things that are worthy of being tackled with a lot of energy and with some knowledge. We see this political correctness culture that we have and the stifling of conversation on so many topics that deserve vigorous discussion, respectful debate. We see an obsession with social media and the decline of just being civil to each other, respectful. We see addiction rearing its head in so many areas, devastating the lives of people. It's so sad, it's so pervasive. We have to be able to deal with this, come up with solutions. We see increasing relativity in moral character. It's like, well, I kind of invent whatever I think is the way to live, and you should just be okay with it, and if there's no standards of morality. And we see a lot of anti-religion sentiments. And I've observed some of those being expressed at this conference as well, which I think is troubling. We see increasing abandonment of religion by young adults. Now, I very much understand why that is the case, when we look at the deficiencies in existing religious institutions. But I'm not approaching this talk in regard to institutions. When I'm talking about religion, I'm talking about something that starts at the very personal and individualized level and pursues wisdom on that trajectory, not through intermediaries, not through institutions. So I know that there's been a lot of disappointment in people who thought that they could find something going through intermediaries and institutions, and they just did not find it. And these young people we have today who are so brilliant in so many ways, they're so gifted, they really are an evolutionary leap beyond previous generations, and there's not enough there to satisfy their hunger. I want to help satisfy that hunger. We see unprecedented youth despair about the future. Crippling feelings for these people, often resulting in just feelings of despair, meaninglessness, hopelessness. It's called nihilism. It means, why should I even be here? What's the point of existence at all? In fact, maybe I'm so desperate that I will take myself right out of the picture with a self-inflicted act. And too often we see that it results in inflicting that on many others at the same time. What the hell is going on? Now I have to tell you, we have enough technology already. I've worked in the breakthrough energy field for many years in this, and that's usually what I lecture about. More technology is not going to address any of these issues here. That's a mask, that's a cover. We need to get more basic than that. We need to get to the heart of the matter. In fact, a lot of things could be said about the technology we already have that's simply been a distraction. It's taken us off the path instead of leading us to what will bring us joy. So much of our technology has enhanced separation consciousness instead of bringing us together. I have an intense interest in what's going on in the minds of intellectual young men. While I have 2 daughters and 2 granddaughters, in fact, my oldest daughter and my 2 granddaughters live with me, so I have the amazing privilege to be raising these young girls, and it's just so many gifts they give to me through that. I've never had sons, but I've always wanted them, so I decided to become a mentor. So I got into the Big Brother program a long time ago, and so there's a fatherless boy who I've been together now with for about 8 years. Brilliant young mind. Right now he's 17 years old. And so I've learned a lot about what's going on in the social lives and in the mentality and in the spiritual hunger of these young men. And it's amazing. It's been such an education for me. And I've been so concerned about what I've seen in this despair and nihilism and meaninglessness. And what do I do? There's so much confusion, so much pressure. It might be like, what's the role? What's a man? Literally, what's a man to do? How do I relate to women? The gender confusion, all of these things, unprecedented issues. We've had 50,000 generations where there was no confusion. And we somehow had some harmony in society. Now they're pressed upon with these very, very potent issues that have caused a lot of separation. How do we heal that? When I heard my little brother, Deep Prasad, who spoke right before me, and I saw that in that young man's life, he went from atheist to having something profound that caused a spiritual revolution in his own mind. I'm like, that's it exactly. That's it exactly. I want to parade him around the world and help him to be an inspiration to these other young men. In fact, for quite a long time, I've been putting together my ideas around how to have a discussion series that is titled this: Intellectual Young Men and the Abandonment of Religion. Why a new revelation of truth is needed for the hungry male mind. That's going to come about. And I see Deep Prasad being the embodiment of why that's so important. Is he here? Is Deep here? Anywhere? Is he here? Okay. Well, anyway, I think what he had to say was extremely important. Bob introduced that I'm going to be speaking about this thing called the Urantia Book, and I am going to do that. I want to let you know how I came upon it. He told you how he had this put in his hands when he was 10 years old, which is really remarkable. For me, it came about a different way. So I had an introduction to a different spiritual text that has been foundational to me. After all my years of studying the Bible and other conventional Christian teachings, growing up in a devout Catholic family, there came this point in my life when I was about 31 years old, where I was introduced to something called A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles has been the most profound work of spiritual literature I've ever come across, and my life has been transformed as a result of experiencing what it has to say. And I've been very diligent in trying to practice what it has to say, and I've become a better man. That's all that can be said about it. Those who know me well have seen the fruits of that. And there was times in my life earlier where you would not have liked me at all for various reasons. But things have changed. Now, after studying A Course in Miracles for about 10 years, I had many, many different experiences, many consistent with what we've heard throughout the week, experiences of UFOs, and I had a near-death experience when I was a teenager. I've had a number of different angelic interventions, experiences of miracles, all these things, so many things. It's like it's really not important, but the story for how I came upon the Urantia Book simply is that I was at a well-known UFO hotspot in the Pacific Northwest. I live in Portland, Oregon, and it's a place I'm very familiar with, and I was up there this one summer night, and it was a new moon, so it was just pitch black, and I'm walking along this driveway where there's trees and shrubs, and you could hardly see your hand in front of your face, and yet I hear these two male voices suddenly off to my right in what just seemed like dense brush, like bushes and things, which seemed kind of curious. But I hear them talking, and then I hear this one male voice say to the other, "Hey, have you ever studied A Course in Miracles?" Well, that just grabbed my attention like a hook, and so now I'm just keenly attuned in. The other voice says, "Oh yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? Have you ever studied the Urantia Book?" And the other voice says, "Oh yeah, that's amazing too." And so I'm thinking, like, the Urantia Book, I've never even heard of that. What is that? But it just locked in. I went on with my night for doing the sky watch and all that. And again, this is a place I'm very, very familiar with. The next morning, I walked back to that same spot, and I can see where those two male voices were. There's just like dense bushes and things. I'm just like, what? This didn't make any sense. Where I take you here next might make some sense. I hope it does. Why investigate this work? Well, in my words, it's a matchless revelation that addresses these big questions in startling detail. It's complex but understandable, and at once it's comprehensive, consistent, and coherent. exactly what those other flavors of scientific and philosophic and religious treatment have not been. It makes sense. I'm a very busy person. As I mentioned, I travel all around and very much working in industrial science and all this. I've spent 15 years studying the Urantia Book diligently. In fact, I had the privilege of examining this a few times a month with a group, some of whom have been studying this for 50 years. I'm sure Bob would be one of those from the sounds of it. And they've got so much wisdom and insight. I am a total neophyte in this, but I'm eager to learn. In fact, you could probably see all week, you probably saw me in the question and answer line almost every time when there's been a speaker, because I have so many questions. In fact, my dad, who was a wonderful man, he's departed, but one of the things he was fond of saying is, son, you never learn anything when your mouth is open. And he was a very wise man of few words. Also a Urantia book. It's beautifully intelligent, masterfully articulating the harmonization of science, philosophy, and religion. How to come about? Very unusual story here. So back in the 1920s and 30s, this information was communicated to a small group of doctors and their associates. And this was right after World War I when it started, and it ended, the communications, before World War II. And it's interesting to note, while it doesn't say this in the book directly, but certainly we can infer it, this was before we entered the nuclear age in earnest. All of the fundamental science for nuclear physics already had been done, and we were well on our way to making a nuclear weapon, which of course would be used just a few years later. Also, we were in the midst of the uprising of communism as well. There were some other interesting things going on the planet here too. In fact, it was mentioned in one of the other presentations about, whoa, you know, this Marian apparition called Fatima, that had just happened just a few years earlier. So it's a lot of intense things going on the planet at the time this communication happened here. Interestingly, the source of the information claims to be a commission of celestial personalities of various orders from various planets. There's no claims at all of human authorship. It's 2,000 pages. And it is not written like a novel. It is written with very high-level verbiage. In fact, much of it is written at what I would call a master's level. And I think for many people who first pick it up, they put it down only after getting into the foreword a few pages. And it's kind of sad in a way, because if they would just kind of hang in there and just pursue it further, it would become more readily accessible intellectually to people who look at it. But it's one of these things where I often have asked people, so have you ever heard of the Urantia book? And they'll go, oh yeah, I have it. In fact, I have it, and it's on my shelf. I say, have you read it? No. Or, well, I got about 3 pages into it, and it just seemed too dense for me, or whatever. So that's a very, very common response that I get. There is a lot of meat in this work. So what does it claim as its mission and purpose? It claims its mission was to deliver what they call the 5th epical revelation to our planet, with the purpose of correcting errors in human understandings of origins, history, and destiny, to present an enlarged concept of God and our relationship to the divine, and to prepare our planetary civilization for further advancement and alignment with what's called the divine plan of progressive evolution. The word Urantia itself is what they say is the name by which our planet is known. out among the neighboring inhabited planets, and that it means our place in the heavens. Some of the topics it covers: the nature of God and the divine plan, our relationship to deity, origins, history, and destiny, the origin, nature, and purpose of various orders of celestial beings, including angels and humans on other inhabited planets, why there is evil, and how rebellion has disastrously impacted the lives of beings on our planet and other neighboring planets, the untold stories of Adam and Eve and Melchizedek and their missions, historical persons who've lived on this planet, the untold story of Jesus, his mission and purpose, an historical person who deeply impacted this planet. Detailed commentaries on science, cultural advancement, governance, marriage and family, and religion. We're going to explore some major themes here. The first of those being God. Some aspects of God, and these are things that most of you would have some familiarity with as you've heard about, well, what would be the nature of God? The uncaused cause, self-aware, self-willed deity, the original personality, origin and destiny of all created personalities, infinite, eternal, ultimate reality. There's that word reality again that I used in my definition of religion. Omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. So all-knowing, all-powerful, everywhere present. Pure spirit, the source of all mind, matter, and energy, the source of life itself, the source of all potential concepts, things, and beings, the creator, upholder, controller of all universal laws. You find those definitions in all the great religious philosophies of our planet. Whether you start with the Vedas, go through Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, so many of them. They express these aspects of God. Now, one of the things that the Urantia Book adds to this is that God is experienceable by creatures, by us, created beings. God is experienceable as truth and beauty and goodness, and is a personable being that we can experience because we're personal. These are hugely important aspects here that often are missed in some other definitions and in some other religions where they don't consider deity to be personal, but only to be maybe a force or a principle. Okay? Here, no. The heart of this is that God has personality. The authors, the celestial beings of the work, have taken great pains to try to paint a picture of how do you convey ideas that are infinite and eternal to the minds of finite beings, us. It's very, very difficult to do. And they said their biggest challenge is trying to even find the language to do this. And this was communicated in the English language. And they say there is a paucity of language in human terms to describe what are these transcendent realities, but we'll do our best to do that. Now, here I am, with this 2,000-page text, given all of, 90 minutes or less. By the way, there's no indication of how much time I have left out here. However, I spent about 200 hours making this presentation to try to somehow boil it down, so that it would be comprehensible to the audience here. But going back to God, so if you figure that the source, the original deity, the reality, begins as undifferentiated original deity personality. It's everything in its own awareness, but yet there's nothing to experience. So just imagine you have everything, You have everything. What could possibly increase your joy? Sharing. Sharing. That's the only thing that could possibly increase your joy. Imagine this. You're a child with the keys to the big toy store. Now, that might be a really happy thought, but what will be a more joyful thought for that child? It's to have a playground and a playmate. Now I can really do something. What the original personality does is differentiate into two personalities. Still one God, but two persons, equal and inseparable. Now, when you have a partner and you want to do these amazing things, you want to play together, you want to collaborate together, what is it that brings you paramount joy? Co-creating. What emerges? The third person. Equal, inseparable from the other two. And this is Trinity. Trinity, three persons in one God. I've never been able to understand this. For all my Catholic, education growing up, it's like, it's just like this. How do I even make it? But I'll tell you, those symbols that I drew and all that and some other things, I wrote that down when I was probably, I would say in my late 20s to early 30s, knowing that someday I'm going to use this. And I actually have the original notebook where I kind of sketches. I'm like, why did I even do that? Now I think it was to put in this presentation here. But Trinitization was a logical and inevitable reality in order for the original deity personality to escape from the bondage of boundless infinity. The original relationship occurred by becoming Father to the Son. The original co-creation resulted in the emergence of spirits. The Father, Son, and Spirit are three distinct persons in one God, equal and inseparable. Masculine and feminine principles are inherent in Trinity. So the text, while they use these conventional terms that have a lot of Christian terminology to them, but they often refer to the Son as the mother Son. Okay? And they refer to the Spirit, even though sometimes they'll use pronouns of his or him. Other times they'll say, this is the mother Spirit. Okay, so let's don't get hung up on gender and all that kind of thing, because God is not male or female. Okay, God is everything and beyond that we can comprehend. But yet we have the pleasure and privilege to experience our lives as male or female. And we have amazing complementarity about that pairing. So from the creature perspective, from our perspective as created beings, the dominant personality characteristics of the Father is love. Of the Son, it's mercy. Of the Spirit, it's ministry or service. And of the Trinity, it's justice, but not human justice. Divine justice is fairness tempered by love and mercy. It's not eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that might substitute for justice in our world here, because we think that's fair, but yet we don't have the eternal perspective to know everything that has preceded on why someone might do something. Yet God knows what has transpired in these lives. They know what were the handicaps, or why someone might be at this level where they might take this action or that, or might grieve somebody, they might hurt somebody. Okay, God knows why that has happened, so can bring this incredible perspective to justice, tempered by love and by mercy. How does God stay in touch with us? This is very, very interesting. It says, the Father bestows personality to all free will beings and maintains contact through what they call a personality circuit. Now, personality has a very specific definition in the Urantia book. It has nothing to do with what our preferences are. It's not about, do we like to dress like this, or does he talk like this, or comb his hair like this, or she, has, these favorite things that she likes to do. It's none of that. In fact, it's not even mind. Personality is not mind. What personality is this, what they say is the only changeless aspect of a being is the personality. It's just absolutely unique. Nothing like it in all of creation. This personality. It's like that snowflake perfection of uniqueness. And that personality has free will. It's the chooser. It's the chooser. Extremely important. The sun is the source of all spiritual energy that animates all spirit beings and maintains contact through a spirit circuit. The spirit is a source of all mind and maintains contact with all universe intelligence through the mind circuit. And that these circuits are the inherent mechanisms of the omniscience and omnipresence of God throughout all creation. So how interesting, circuits. And it uses that word throughout the text, circuits, circuits, circuits. Very interesting, what that conveys. So going back to that trinity of circles, that simple diagram, notice that there are 7 different sections and subsections there. Well, there's a significance to 7. Trinity has potential for 7 solitary or coordinate deity personality expressions. Father, Son, Spirit, Father, Son, Father, Spirit, Son, Spirit, Father, Son, Spirit. And that these 7 deity personality expressions manifest variously throughout creation. Then they refer to what is called God the sevenfold. Deity manifests on 7 successive levels of approach from from deity to and from created orders of being. So this is very necessary because of the vast differential between beings of pure spirit and beings that are largely material, like us. So if for some reason, like we all of a sudden appeared in the actual presence of the Trinity, our physical being simply would just be gone. Our minds would just fracture because we do not yet have the vehicle to have the vehicle that contains our personality would not be appropriate to withstand the brilliance and whatever that word implies, a spiritual brilliance at that level of spirit. We have to be prepared for such an encounter. And that's so much of what is the education in the book itself. So there's 7 successive levels of approach. The first one is the Father, second the Son, third is the Spirit. And they say that the Father's at the center, the Son enshrouds the Father, the Spirit enshrouds the Son. And so as we ascend toward the realization of ultimate reality, we'll encounter the Spirit first, then the Son, and then the Father. And there's some amazing things that happen along the way. The fourth level is what they call the Supreme Being. In order to understand the Supreme Being, we should contemplate first knowledge. What does it mean? Knowledge implies potential. Okay? So I can know that I could do something or be something, yet not having taken that step of doing or being, but I can know it. Being implies experience. Okay? Having both is very desirable. So to differentiate this, I could know that I could be a basketball player. because I rationally know that I got 2 feet, I got 2 hands, they move pretty well, I got eyes to be able to see, I know there's a basketball court right down the street, my neighbor has a basketball, and there's some other guys who seem to claim to be basketball players. I could likely join them with this mobile body and with that basketball of my neighbor, and I can run down there, and now I can actually have the experience of being a basketball player. Had the knowledge first, but I don't have the beingness until I have the experience. And so the Supreme Being is evolving experiential deity, whereas the Trinity is existential, eternal, always has been, but non-experiencing. It has all knowledge, but not direct experience. Here's where the Supreme Being comes in. So all the experience of time-space beings throughout the universe, all of their experience gets focalized in the Supreme Being. So God gives life to us and experiences life through us. So there's a reciprocity there that benefits each. The 5th level is called the 7 master spirits, and these are the planners and overseers of the 7 evolutionary time-space super universes, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But each master spirit of those 7 presides over its own super universe of time-space worlds and imparts unique qualities to that particular part of creation. Our super universe is described as the last and most recent of the time-space creations. The 6th level is called the Ancients of Days, and these are triune administrators of each of those 7 super universes. So 3 times 7 is 21 of these beings. And they're called the Ancients of Days because they're the first created beings in the evolutionary time-space super universes, and their residence is on the massive sphere at the very center of each of those super universes. The 7th level of deity personality expression to our order of being is called the Creator Sons and Creative Mother Spirits. These are the co-creators and co-rulers of what they say is 700,000 evolutionary time-space local universes of stars, planets, and beings. And that a pair of these co-creators embarks on this adventure and is responsible for this evolutionary process of stabilizing all of the planets and suns and everything that has to do with the physical universe, as well as developing the primitive creature life on the habitable planets to the point of human emergence to our order of being. And then they're responsible for stewarding the ascension plan of our order of being up through these various levels of reality to ultimately attain communion with original deity, with the Father itself. And there's amazing things that happen along the way. And it's very collaborative in that they employ many, many other beings of service here, including the angelic orders, what they call administrative sons of God, and other beings of special service. Uniquely, the Creator Sons are described as having to go through some experiential tests, if you will, that they call bestowals, and that they're to undertake 7 of these bestowals in the likeness of the creatures of their own creation. So, for instance, a Creator Son would have to experience an actual life as an angel to know what that actually is like. He has to experience the actual life of being one of these administrator sons and various other orders of being. And that the 7th and final bestowal is an incarnation as a human being. Amazing. Incarnating as a human being. That's the final bestowal. And after that final bestowal as a human, the actual spirit of that Creator Son is poured out on every human being on that planet that is there at the time, and every human being who was born on that planet going forever into the future. Every other inhabited planet in that local system receives another being, a very high being, who also incarnates and performs a similar mission to what the Creator Son did. Because the Creator Son has that incarnation experience on only one of the planets in his local universe. Right now, they say in our local universe, there are about 4 million inhabited planets, and that a fully developed local universe would have about 10 million of those. But only on one of those 4 million could he incarnate in his bestowal mission. And why do this? It's to gain experience, to gain sympathetic understanding of what it's like to be a creature. Very important. I think it makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. How can you wisely administrate your own family as a parent, as a mother or a father, if you haven't had the experience of growing up as a child and going through the teenage years and going through the early aspects of a marriage and all that? All of you who are parents, grandparents, just think about how rich that's been to go through all those stages. And now you've got children and you want to be a wise parent. If you're a grandparent, you want to be a wise grandparent. You got to bring all that experience. It's critical. Why? What does that message, that Creator Son who's incarnated is human, what does he bring? Well, he brings the revelation of the loving nature of the Father. And this is where that quote comes from. He who has seen the Son has seen the Father. And very importantly, teaches that we are all part of the family of God. The brotherhood of man, the brotherhood of women, brotherhood of the family. Not just here on this planet, but the universal family of God. And by completing those 7 bestowal missions, the Creator Son acquires sovereignty over his local universe with his complement, the creative Mother Spirit, and they co-rule the local universe, but understandingly, wisely, sympathetically, with great love, great understanding, because the Creator Son has lived as one of these beings. So they seek to serve. They seek to serve. They seek to serve. Let's consider the origin of creation itself. They say that there's the central universe, and it's comprised of 2 primary components. First is what they call paradise. And they say paradise was created by the Father. It's the geographic center of all creation. It's the abode of the Trinity. It's the source and center of all energy, matter, and physical gravity. Imagine that. Gravity is coming from the center and pulling everything toward it, keeping everything in orbit around it. Paradise exists outside of space and time and is motionless. It is existential and eternal. It consists of a massive central isle of light that's encircled by 3 circuits of 7 planets each. This is an artist's rendition of it. What they say is that the isle, the central isle of light, is the single most massive unit of organized reality in all creation. It's incomprehensible how massive this is. And it has an actual location in space. It has a geographic location, although we would not be able to comprehend it because it's outside of space-time. But yet it is there, and it has gravitational effects. Then they say the second component of the central universe is what's called Havona. Havona was created by the Trinity, is comprised of 7 concentric circuits of these massive planets, 1 billion in total, that orbit paradise. It's the first time-space creation. It's existential and eternal. The perfect Havona spheres are inhabited by perfect created beings of all types, including our order, the human order. And that these perfect beings serve as patterns for the perfecting process of the evolutionary time-space worlds and beings. So there are patterns of perfection that we will gradually be moving toward. But we're starting at a very low place in the chain. But it's an amazing adventure going through the perfecting experience. So here, the same artist, here's the rendition here. So you have the Isle of Light at the very center, and then the 1 billion perfect worlds orbiting all of that. And we are to experience each one of those 1 billion perfect worlds, each which are absolutely unique, absolutely resplendent with beauty and creation in ways that are just so far beyond anything we've experienced. But yet, we will experience each of those in our adventure. A little bit about time itself. So time is a mental construct that provides a frame of reference for relative motion and movement. But even in a timeless realm like paradise, the spirit beings there, they're endowed with an inherent sense of sequentiality. I'll give you a little analogy here. So let's, just take like a CD disc that we're all familiar with here, okay? So we have a CD disc. Now, from a reference point outside time, we inherently know that this whole disc and all the songs on it, they exist simultaneously on the disc. And we know that this is an intentional sequence of information and vibration. We know that. So just static knowledge, outside time, I know it's all there. But it's not till I actually put this thing in the CD player and I'm in time that now I get to experience each of those songs in sequence. And so now I get to experience the meaning of all of that information and vibration. Now, that may be a very weak example. That's the best I could come up with on what time may imply. The 7 time-space super universes. Okay, these massive creations orbit the central universe of Paradise and Havona, and each of these super universes are enormous aggregations of galaxies. Each have approximately 1 trillion inhabited planets with beings of our order. 7 trillion in total. And then surrounding those super universes in the vast reaches of outer space are far more massive clusters of galaxies. The outer space levels much, much more vast in their reach and in the number of spheres of space, suns and planets that are out there. Here's the same artist rendition. So the very central little, paradise isle at this scale, and then that very first ring is the 7 super universes. All of these other 4 rings, bigger and bigger and bigger, those are all the uninhabited outer space levels, beyond comprehension, beyond the reach, right, so far of our Earth telescopes. The universe is not disorderly. There is order because there is administration. Chaos does not prevail. So, starting with the super universe level, 1 trillion inhabited planets, and there's an administration at the super universe level. The local universe level, 10 million inhabited planets. And by the way, it's the spirit presence of the local universe creative mother that actually defines the boundaries of a local universe. So you could be like right on the very edge where her spirit presence ends. The neighboring local universe is a spirit presence of another local universe, creative mother spirit, who is the complement of that universe's creator son. A constellation is defined as having 100,000 inhabited planets. A local system, about 1,000 inhabited planets. not to be confused with what we call a solar system. In fact, they say that in our own local system, there are about 500 solar systems, okay? Now that implies that, well, if we divide 1,000 by 500, that means that there's, two, an average of maybe 2 inhabited planets per system or per solar system. Inhabited planet is the lowest administrative unit, and that would represent a planet like our own, Earth, what they call Urantia. The Big Bang Theory, let's look at that for a second here. It's based on measurements that suggest the universe is expanding and that galaxies are accelerating away from each other, as well as the detection of what they call a cosmic microwave background. And as we've heard so many times, the adherents of the Big Bang Theory, they claim that universe and time itself originated from this infinitesimally small, energy-dense singularity 13.8 billion years ago. But no explanation of what came before it or why it banged, okay? Very unsatisfying. They also propose that the universe is going to eventually end in a deep freeze of diffuse matter because everything's flying apart, okay? Or that the universe is going to reverse direction, collapse in upon itself, and end in a big crunch. Well, that's a hopeful, happy story, isn't it? Well, what does the Urantia Book have to say about this? And by the way, the Big Bang Theory was first proposed by a Catholic Jesuit astronomer named Lemaitre at the same time in the 1920s, late 1920s, the same time that the Urantia information was being communicated to our planet. So they were very well aware of what was the leading cosmological theory that was coming out of the minds of humans on our planet. So what do they claim? The paradise center of all creation has always existed and is the source of all energy, matter, and physical gravity. Havona has always existed and has motion, therefore time has always existed. And space itself expands and contracts in a type of space respiration in approximately 2 billion year cycles. And that currently space is at near the midpoint of the expansion phase of that cycle. So no wonder our astronomers see space expanding. They have good reason for it. They could do calculations and measurements. And this is not contradicting that. It's just saying that from the perspective of humanity's existence, you have not seen a full cycle. So how would you know that there is a cycle unless there was some revelation to let you know that? And so that's part of what this is to correct the misunderstandings of human ideas of origins, history, and destiny. Okay, another big theme here, intelligent design or evolution, right? Big debate that's been going on for over 100 years. Okay, let's look at what they call architectural spheres. The first acts of a creator son and creative mother spirit is the organization of their local universe. In the organization of the local universe are the construction of what they call architectural spheres. And these comprise the capital worlds at the center of each of the local, both the local universe and the comprising constellations and the local systems. And they say there's one local universe headquarters planet with almost 500 satellites attached to it, 100 constellations comprising a local universe, and then they have a lot of satellites as well, and 10,000 local systems comprising a local universe. Add them all up, there's over 600,000 architectural spheres in each local universe. And there are 700,000 local universes. There are these artificial massive spheres. Those are the administrative headquarters, or the capitals, if you will, for administration, all throughout creation. So when we hear these ideas about, oh, well, maybe that was an artificial planet or whatever, this was discussed in this book 80 to 100 years ago. It's not a new conception, but this is bringing some real definition and detail to it. Evolution is God's technique of creation in the time-space universes. This is something that even as a boy I thought makes a hell of a lot more sense than fiat creation, where God just goes, sun, water, human. Just that never made any sense. This makes a hell of a lot more sense. When we consider the units of biological life, DNA itself, all right, what's all the science say? This is a code. This is a genetic code. If there's a code, there's a coder. Someone encoded it. It didn't just randomly happen by atoms and molecules colliding and somehow resulting in DNA. Good God. You know, it's just, get out of that mind. I get embarrassed when I hear scientists go to that place. Oh, it's just a random collision of these mindless atoms and all that. Well, you just check the probability if it happened. You know, it's bound to happen. Everything's bound to happen. No, it's not. No, it's not. A tomato seed that when you plant it in the ground, all you have to do is pour some water on it, hope for a few sunny days, and then this amazing green plant with delicious ripe red fruit comes out that can nourish our bodies. That did not happen by accident, by random collisions that happen over. It's bound to be it's a probability. Yeah, but it's such an infinitesimally small probability. Take your head out of your ass. This is apparent. It's designed. There are beings that they refer to as life carriers. The life carriers are an order of being who are master genetic scientists. They are tasked with this very high sacred duty to implant the genetic seeds of life on planets that have geophysically stabilized and that are destined to become inhabited by human beings. They are the stewards of the evolutionary plan of biologic advancement. 10% of the inhabited planets are what they call life modification spheres, on which those life carriers manipulate the environment and the genetic coding to bring about new traits and species, even creating entirely new species. Our planet is a life modification sphere. Guess what? Because that's not very common, that creates intense interest from the beings on other inhabited planets. Because they're like, I want to go to that zoo. We're going to see some new animals there, Mom. Let's go to that. Let's go to that place. Let's check it out. The life carriers, because they are immortal beings, they also are the historians of the pre-human epochs on a planet. And they also happen to comprise some of the beings who were part of the commission that gave the information. So they have a perspective that goes back to the origins of life on our planet. No speculation. They were witnesses. Beyond witnesses, they were the ones who implanted it and who have the ability to manipulate it from a level of genetic science that's way beyond what we can conceive right now. The inhabited planets, how do you determine what an inhabited planet is? It's a planet where life has evolved to the human level, to our order of being. And for every one of those inhabited planets, there are hundreds of other planets that have some form of life. It might range from bacterial life to the higher animals. But it's only considered and put on the registry, because they talk about a registry. A planet is only on the registry as being inhabited when life has emerged at the human order of being. We are considered evolutionary will creatures, meaning that we are self-conscious and we have free will prerogatives to make moral choices and with the inherent capacity to know God. That's what differentiates us from the monkeys. We have free will prerogatives to make moral choices and the capacity to know God. There are many human types, but we all have a common and apparently very functional physical anatomy. One head, two eyes, two hands, bipedal. Okay, it's a very functional form. Serves us well. Some of the human species have 1, 2, or 3 brains. We're considered the 2 brain because of our 2 hemispheres. There's air breathing and non-breathing. We're the air breathing. There are terrestrial, marine, and atmospheric types. Well, we're the terrestrial type. But there are other human beings on other planets who apparently fly, and they're designed to do that. Maybe they're like bats or something like that. The planetary administrator. So when the primitive human races, and by the way, they say that primitive man emerged from the higher animal kingdom about 1 million years ago. About 1 million years ago was when those particular hominids now had the capacity to make a moral decision. They had also the capacity to know God. Well, when the humans have reached that suitable physical and mental level, a being, an order of being called a Lananandek son, these are administrative beings, comes to the planet with his staff to establish a headquarters of education and training for the purpose of cultural advancement of humanity. The best and brightest of the humans are selected, trained, and sent back as ambassadors to their tribes. Makes a lot of sense. The plan includes the gradual blending of the various evolutionary races to achieve a fairly homogeneous planetary race, embodying the best characteristics of each racial strain in preparation for the future hybridization mission of the planetary Adam and Eve. Very important. All right. It says that most planets have somewhere between 3 and 6 evolutionary races, and that generally they're kind of just distinguished by pigmentation. So they use the colors. They say there's a red, yellow, blue, orange, green, and indigo or black race. But those are kind of like the 6 pigmented races. They said on our planet we've had seven primitive races. So there's 1 in addition to the 6 colored races. Some planets, they say, only have 3 that emerge. Okay, so what about that planetary Adam and Eve? Well, first thing that they say is that these are master zoologists and botanists. They're absolutely expert in ways we can't even believe, such that they can even communicate with the animal kingdom telepathically. They say that there's a planetary Adam and Eve for each inhabited planet. They are genetically superior to the evolutionary primitive humans. Their bodies are 8 to 10 feet tall. They radiate a visible violet glow, thus they are called the violet race. They also have dual circulatory systems, one of blood, just like the evolutionary humans, but a secondary circulatory system of light energy. And that the Adam and Eve are immortal while they partake of some of the fruit or leaves of a transplanted shrub or tree that's generally referred to as the tree of life. And they're likely using that because, we have some of our own literature that speaks of a tree of life. But that vegetation somehow concentrates cosmic energy and helps to sustain this light energy circulatory system that they uniquely have. They are to procreate 1 million or more direct line descendants over many generations, and for the purpose of interbreeding with the evolutionary humans to greatly improve the genetic endowments of that hybridized human race. And that the endowments of the hybrids include enhanced spiritual perception, enhanced mental capacity, telepathy, enhanced physique, resistance to disease, and longevity. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So the planetary Adam and Eve never are the first humans. They've been preceded by the arrival of, or the evolution of primitive humans long before the arrival of the Adam and Eve. What about free will itself? Very important. Well, the extent to which a free will being recognizes and desires to align its will with the divine qualities of truth, beauty, and goodness. That determines the degree of that human's receptivity to communication from deity. The desire to do the will of God means to increasingly manifest those divine qualities in the life of the being, and is the only meaningful gift from the created to the Creator. But it's for the good of the being. This desire is essential to becoming increasingly God-like. God wants us to become like God. That's what this, let us create man in our own image means, is we're given the tools to do it. And should we choose it, because we're given free will, we get to choose this destiny. It's not imposed on us. Very important distinction. We choose. Remember the personality? It's the chooser. The indwelling spirit. This is a very central topic throughout the Urantia book. It's very important here. A divine spark of the universal Father is gifted to each human being. This indwelling spirit inhabits the human mind, yet is subservient to the human free will, despite being God in man. It's subservient to our will. That's how precious our free will prerogative is. The indwelling spirit never commands, compels, or coerces the human, but rather quietly and persistently leads us to greater choices for truth, beauty, and goodness. For our benefit, that still small voice within can increasingly be heard through prayer and meditation. I can attest to that. I can attest to that. I can say unabashedly, I'm a man who knows there is God. I don't need to prove that to anybody, and I don't care what anyone thinks about it. But I can say with all sincerity, I'm a man who knows there is God. Again, the only gift of value to the Father is a sincere desire to do the divine will for our benefit, to endeavor to be perfect as the Father in heaven is perfect. In fact, they refer to that as the universal injunction to all created beings of the human order. Be you perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. That doesn't mean that it's expected to happen right now. It means that please choose for your own good to participate in this long ascension plan that's laid out for you. All you have to do is trust in the plan. Choose it, experience it, move along, be adventurous, take the journey, because there's an amazing destiny awaiting each one of you who do. The soul. Boy, what a controversial topic. What is the soul? Well, the Urantia book is very specific about how the soul is defined. The human soul is distinct from the mortal mind, personality, and indwelling spirit. It is not any of those. It's something distinct. The soul is an evolving reality that is created and grows by the human's free will choices of truth, beauty, and goodness, and through the agency of the indwelling spirit, God within us. The soul is a blending of the mortal mind and eternal spirit and has the potential of immortality. The potential of immortality. Its form is comprised of neither material nor spiritual substance, but rather of a new substance that they call Urantia. It's a word you find nowhere else on this planet but in the Urantia book, Urantia. And it's used many times. It's a concept they're trying to communicate to us, and they must have had a lot of debates about what the hell do we name this stuff. Pudding, porpoise poop, I don't know, what is it? But they use this word Urantia. But what they say is that the physical level is a very relatively small percentage of the available spectrum of energy and information or frequency. The Urantia part of the spectrum is very, very wide, vast. There's many, many levels. But at any of those Urantia levels, all senses are greatly expanded. All colors, there's such a much wider spectrum of colors. The materials, the physical materials, the number of elements for construction of matter, much, much more. Like we have approximately 100 elements in our 3D physical aspect. In the Urantia world, it's up to 1,000 elements to comprise matter. Whole nother realm of being. And then the spirit end of the spectrum is that much higher, okay? But Urantia comprises so much of the ascension journey and what we end up experiencing. Very importantly, eternal survival of the human personality through the vehicle of the soul is a free will choice and is not automatic. It is not automatic. We need to choose it. We're not slaves. I'm a father and a grandfather. I love my 2 daughters. The last thing I want is to have them slavishly obey me. I can't force their love. I desire their love, but as a free will choice of their own, because I'm deserving of it. I want to be a wise father, wise grandfather. I want them to want to love me. They're not my slaves. Well, this is going to be tough. An amazing book by Byron Beleaguered, Your Evolving Soul, can give you a lot of insights on that. They're saying I only have 10 minutes here, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of content, but heaven, I'll try my best. The ascension journey of the human soul. Upon the death of the body, the unconscious, immature soul is escorted by the guardian seraphim, which is an order of angel, to the local system training worlds where it's resurrected to a new body of Urantia substance. The free will choice of eternal life results in this eventual fusion. That's what they call it, a fusion between the indwelling spirit that's in the human mind with the fusion between the indwelling spirit and the mortal mind. And that results in a new being. And it's described in many, many terms. It's quite a significant portion of the book. But that results in immortality of the soul. But it's a choice. And they say normally that doesn't happen till we go to that next life. Up at the local system level on those training spheres. But they said it has happened twice historically while the being was on this planet. Once with Enoch, once with Elijah. And that fusion is a very energetic effect, and it results essentially in this flash. They call it the fusion flash or the translation flash. And that is, it happens increasingly more often on planets that are more evolved. But at our level, where we're still kind of at fairly rudimentary levels, it's happened infrequently. But it will start to happen more frequently. The spiritual progress occurs through a long series of successive resurrections in ever more glorious forms and with further training on increasingly resplendent planets. The intermediate destination of that ascension is at the local universe headquarters world, where we commune with and are embraced and get to know very intimately and very personally with the Creator Son and Creator Mother Spirit. Much further along the way, the destination is with the Trinity and with the Father himself. And it's a vast adventure. At that stage of being communing personally, being embraced by the Father, at that stage, we are considered a perfected spirit being, a divine human. And that perfection training that's happened all along the way, it qualifies us for an amazing destiny, where we're groomed to now be able to go out in loving and joyful service out into the universe. Maybe we educate other beings who are not yet at our level at that point. Maybe it's for administration purposes. Maybe it's help to bring order and peace to parts of the universe that have, for some reason, become chaotic. Maybe it's even to co-create new inhabited worlds. Not sitting on clouds playing harps. That perfection and experience, it has knowledge involved. There's education. There's effort involved, thus the training. So knowledge and effort. Amazing things await us, but it's there for the choosing. Free will choice. Nothing automatic, nothing imposed. Hell? Hell no. Okay? We get to choose. We're free to choose our soul survival or soul extinction. If we embrace truth, beauty, and goodness, which is aligned with cosmic reality, that's the choice for eternal life. If we choose to embrace evil, to impose our will on others destructively, willfully, persistently, that has the effect of rendering the personality insane from a cosmic perspective, and it extinguishes the soul. As we pursue evil from the cosmic perspective, we are becoming less real because we're non-aligned with reality. There's no eternal damnation and hellfire for the wicked. I would never condemn one of my children or grandchildren to torment and torture. How could the source of love have a lower standard? Good God! Preachers, get them out of the pulpit. Stop preaching that nonsense. Use your human reason here. Do not ascribe to God these barbaric qualities. It's false. Repeat it way too often. There's nothing that can be said about a lie that serves to make it true. If all offers of mercy and rehabilitation and redemption are rejected by that free will soul, the most merciful fate, it's not hellfire, it's annihilation of the personality. It's sad. It's considered the most serious and sober decision in all of reality, is the decision for the annihilation of a personality. However, there are family responsibilities. And we're responsible to each other. If we start acting and choosing in a way to destroy our own family, what does the responsible father do? Although it crushes his own heart, he has to put his own child down to protect the others. Terrible decision to have to make. But we have to reflect that we are in the image of God. So much of what is in our experience comes from the pattern of the divine. Let's get out of our heads on a lot of this airy-fairiness. We have real living examples among us as brothers and sisters, fathers, wives, mothers, children. Angels. Thank God for angels. Many different types of angels. The closest to us are called the guardians. They love us, watch over us. They make a permanent record of our lives. They help nudge us toward prayer for our benefit. For our benefit. God does not need our prayers. We need to pray. It's how we communicate. It's how we receive help. After physical death, the guardian seraphim transports us to that next world. And they describe this as transport seraphim. What they say is that there is a type of shield that comes out from the angel and encapsulates that sleeping soul so it can be safely transported from here to that next world. And that those who had expanded spiritual perception, when they saw this process happening of the transport seraphim bringing their energy shields out to encapsulate the soul, they had naturally thought of those as wings, the winged seraphim. Those are energy shields to protect the soul during transport at superluminal velocities. Makes sense. Upon, arrival at that destination, the guardian angel also oversees the resurrection of the human soul into the Urantia body that is suitable for this progression. But it starts right there in that first world. They call it a mansion world, and it's referred to as heaven in our terms, because even that very first world is so much beyond our planet here. So much correction and education and training that happens. Another order of beings called the midwayers. They're the closest order of being to our own. They exist between the human and angelic. Thus they are midway creatures. They're normally invisible to us, but with some exceptions by those who have extended spiritual perception. They have been with us all along. They are the planetary historians since the arrival of primitive man on the planet. They also comprise some of the celestial beings that imparted the information. In fact, they were the ones who petitioned to be able to deliver this information, because they were so concerned about what's going on our planet and with our own species here. The midwayers were intervening on our behalf. They also can manipulate energy and matter in our realm. They work closely with the angels and can intervene to prevent accidents. I have experienced this directly. So, the devil. This is going to be familiar in some ways to most of us, because we've heard some of these names. But what those names really pertain to, as far as the personality and what their role was, I think you're going to be very surprised, but it's going to make sense. The first betrayer, Lucifer. Lucifer is a brilliant being of this order of high beings called the Lanonendek sons. He was created by our local universe creator son, and he was extensively trained to be our local system administrator. He was entrusted with the administration of our local system of 619 inhabited planets. Not just this planet here, but many other neighboring worlds. And he had the sacred duty of stewarding the evolutionary ascension plan for humans on each of those planets. A very high and sacred duty. 200,000 years ago, Lucifer betrayed his trust. And he instigated a rebellion against the divine plan under the guise of what has come to be known as his Declaration of Liberty. It's more than what I can do justice here to describe that to you. It's quite detailed and involved. It is not a simplistic little treatise. And I encourage you to go take a look at it when you have a chance. In order to prevent the spread of chaos throughout our local system, the system was quarantined, and that meant that all normal communication circuits with other local systems and other planets were completely severed, and that was to contain the effects of the rebellion. Not to eliminate it, that was something that would come later, but just to contain it like an infection. The second betrayer, Satan, another familiar name to us all. Satan also is of the same Lanonendek order. However, he was at a lower administrative level. Basically, he was the lieutenant under Lucifer. Satan embraced the Lucifer rebellion fully, and his mission was to go as an ambassador to each of those 607 planets that were inhabited at the time. I'll make this distinction. Right now, our local system has 619 inhabited worlds. At that time, 200,000 years ago, there were 607, because more planets have become inhabited since that time. But his mission was to go and to recruit into rebellion the planetary administrators on each of those worlds. And the enticement was the temptation that they would become the god of their respective inhabited planet. Quite a temptation. And he was successful in 37 cases. So on 37 of those inhabited planets, the planetary administrator and his staff and many of the other ministering beings went into rebellion. And this caused complete havoc on those planets. The third betrayer, a name you're not familiar with, Caligastia. Caligastia is also of that Linanadec order. He was entrusted with the assignment of the planetary administrator of our world. He arrived on our planet with his staff of 100, 500,000 years ago. 500,000 years ago, Caligastia came here with his staff. And he established his headquarters, his capital city, actually the world's first city, near the Persian Gulf. He did his duties very well, executed them really, really well for 300,000 years. Now, obviously, these are immortal beings. He and his staff had no issues with the normal aging, decay that are typical here. He himself was not visible to the human order here. However, his staff was. In fact, his staff of 100 came from 100 different planets. There were 50 males, 50 females, each of them from a different inhabited planet. And they had already lived lives on their respective inhabited world, finished their lives, likely had a normal human life of sorts. They died. They were transported to the mansion worlds up and around the local system headquarters. And then after some training and education, they volunteered to come to this world where there was just primitive human life and to assist the planetary administrator in his mission. And so what was required was for those beings, those 100 staff, when they arrived here with Caligastia, they had to have bodies, special bodies constructed for them, which the life carriers who I mentioned earlier and some other special beings, they very, very quickly constructed these bodies that were essentially supermen and superwomen from the way we would perceive them. They were over 8 feet tall, these men and women, and they also had injected into these constructed bodies some human life plasm. They used the word plasm, but it would have been maybe some human DNA from our planet, might have been stem cells, something like that. They don't go into too much technical detail. But these were really superhuman men and women. They would have had a very imposing presence given their height, their intelligence, their universe wisdom, because they'd already had lived lives as humans on other planets. They'd gone through the education on the mansion worlds. So they were much more intelligent than what the primitive humans would have been for sure, and would have had tremendous influence just by their presence. They would have been viewed as demigods and demigoddesses, no doubt about that. Caligastia, after those 300,000 years of solid progress and advancement of human civilization, he also betrayed his trust. He bought into the enticement of Satan, and he joined the Lucifer rebellion, which immediately threw our planet into chaos. And it regressed. Humanity went into a very, very rapid retrograde situation. And this totally disrupted all the advances in human civilization. Mankind went back into savagery and barbarism, and so much advanced knowledge was lost. This is part of what's being recovered. When we hear about the archaeological missions all over, we're starting to see, okay, there was high technology here. All right, well, these people who were the staff of Caligastia, they knew about high technology. All right, they were entrusted with bringing up humanity, slowly but gradually, but they had a lot of tools at their disposal. So there were 3 betrayals, or betrayers. You got Lucifer, and then Satan, and then Caligastia. Also, there were rebel angels and rebel midwayers who came into play. You know, these beings, the angels on the planet were at a lower created order than Caligastia. They're not as intelligent, not as spiritually perceptive, not as universally skilled. But the angels have a very, very critical mission to play, not just as guardians, not just as guardian seraphim for the humans, but many other missions of specialized service. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the midwayers, they're like the intelligence corps, because they've been along the whole way since humanity has arisen from the higher animals. Well, they just could not conceive that a being as brilliant as Caligastia could possibly be in error regarding his decision to join Lucifer's Declaration of Liberty. So they were very vulnerable to his persuasions, and many of them joined his cause. There was a lot of subsequent havoc that were brought upon the human races by the activities of the rebel angels and rebel midwayers, including instances of demonic possession among the lower-minded humans. And there were many other disruptive activities that they partook of at that time. And it was just a serious retrograde situation. Basically, humanity was just totally going in reverse here. And that was part of the Lucifer plan all along. Part of what was the real challenge for Lucifer, for Satan, and Caligastia was that this ascension plan was taking these beings, these human beings, these lowly, barely above the higher animal level beings, educating them, bringing all types of universal knowledge toward them, ascending them world by world, inward on this journey toward the Trinity itself, with the final embrace by the Father of all. And the idea of these lowly humans ascending to ever greater heights of glory and universe wisdom and capacity to serve, and actually bypassing these other levels, was just inconceivable to these proud beings. You see, they had been created at a higher order. Lucifer, Satan, Caligastia, they were created as high beings. We were not. We were created at the very low evolutionary level, but our destiny was to progress through intent, through effort, through free will choice to become like God. But it meant that in that very hard, long experiential progression, we would bypass the level of these created beings. And the pride of Lucifer and Satan just could not stand that. They could not take that. So what's the status of these rebels? 2,000 years ago, the incarnation of our local Creator Son occurred here. The Lucifer rebellion in our whole local system technically was terminated by the arrival of our Creator Son in human flesh, in human form. However, the effects of the rebellion have continued to reverberate. since the last 2,000 years. And we see evidence of that. There's still evil on this world. There's still corruption. There's so many things going wrong in high places, and so much of the planet is under the undue influence of evil. They're being preyed upon, deceived. So this continues to go on. It wasn't a magic bullet, the arrival of our Creator Son here, despite his teaching mission and all the wisdom he brought, his miracles, the great signs, and his humility. None of it, well, I wouldn't say none of it, but much of that requires a much longer time to play out. And he had the deck stacked against him because our world was so disordered and so arrayed against his mission. Well, Lucifer and Satan, along with the other leaders of the rebel angels and midwares, we're told that they have been interned and they have been essentially incarcerated on what you could just term a prison planet that's near the local system headquarters. So they have, had their most influential activities totally curtailed. However, Caligastia, who was referred to as the devil and the prince of this world by Jesus, that's who he was talking about as a person. He was talking about the person of Caligastia. He's allowed to continue to roam our world. He was not incarcerated. Still, there's this drama that's being allowed to play out. Much of that has to do with our free will decisions on what is our choice, what is our path. We have a path that could lead to the Father, or a path that could take us in a real serious misdirection. We hear about satanic rituals and human sacrifices still this day, by just some hideous, distorted minds on our planet. Are they being influenced by a nefarious, invisible being who can influence their minds? Well, the answer is that could well be the case. If someone is making the free will decision to call upon Caligastia using another rebel name, Lucifer, Satan, one of the rebel angels, midwares, or they're practicing some type of a ritual, whether ignorantly or with full intent, there's the possibility that they may actually find him in their presence with full-blown influence and deception. It's a real caution. I mentioned at the very beginning that the mission of the Urantia information that was communicated to this world in the 1920s and 30s was to provide the fifth epical revelation. I'm going to talk about the other revelations as well. First is the arrival of the planetary administrator. As I mentioned, this was Caligastia and his staff of 100. They arrived here 500,000 years ago. So his administration had the task of introducing culture, industry, agriculture, hygiene, animal husbandry, the rudiments of civil administration, schooling, all of these things that we take for granted as part of human culture now. But primitive man had none of this. So they had this long plan to progress the human races in this enculturation. And it was for good purpose. It was for our benefit. It was for us. There also were fundamental spiritual truths that were taught. The religion that Caligastia's administration taught was based on 7 moral precepts. And you're all familiar with them in some form or fashion. They basically were the rudiments of what later became known as the 10 Commandments of Moses. So they're embodied in there. So if you're familiar with that, you're going to know what the basic 7 moral precepts are. The other thing they taught was the concept of one God, the universal Father. And there was very slow but steady progression over 300,000 years. It's a very long period. Now, what went along with that was culture was advancing, and there were cities being built. There was structure. There was order. There's quite a bit of what we could call technology here. But then, when Caligastia and 60 of his staff of 100 went into rebellion, all hell broke loose, literally, on the planet. Now, of those 60 rebellious staff, and remember again, these are like, 8 foot tall plus men and women who were viewed as demigods, essentially, by all the primitive men and women at that time. They had a leader chosen who was selected by that group of 60, and it was a being called Nod. Nod later became the leader of what was called the Nodites. And that name Nod might be familiar to those of you who have ever really studied the book of Genesis, because it says when after Cain slew his brother Abel, he was basically sent into exile by Adam. Adam just said, son, you no longer can be here. And so he exiled him. But Cain was very worried because he knew if he went out into the world that he would be killed. Well, from the Genesis perspective, who would have killed him? Because it gives you the perception of, there's only Adam and Eve and Cain and his slain brother Abel. There are no other humans on the whole planet, so this doesn't make sense. Who's going to harm him? All right? So he receives the mark of Cain, which actually was the mark of Adam. Adam put his mark on Cain because Adam was so revered, and we'll be talking about him in a moment here. He was so revered by all the surrounding tribes that no one was going to molest someone who had the mark of Adam on him. And so where does Cain get exiled to? The land of Nod, to take a wife. Okay? The land of Nod. I've always wondered that since I was a boy, and in my Catholic upbringing, and we're going over the Bible stories and all that. Well, what is this? The land of Nod, to take a wife? A wife among whom? The animals? What? I mean, because there's no other humans on the planet. Well, when Caligastia went into rebellion with 60 of his staff, what they found was that immediately the dual circulatory system that all the staff members had. Remember I mentioned earlier that the planetary Adam and Eve had a dual circulatory system, one of blood and one of light energy. The same applied to Caligastia's staff. So they pretty quickly found out that when they went into rebellion, the light energy circuits that animated that secondary circulatory system were shut off for them. So now they were vulnerable to aging, which hadn't been the case before because they'd lived 300,000 years on this planet, never having to worry about that because they had this essential, immortality system of energy that was coming to them. And they also had partaken of the nourishment from the tree of life, because it was actually Caligastia who first brought the tree of life here. It wasn't Adam and Eve or an angel at later times, something like that. Caligastia brought that tree of life. But they found that even though they would consume some of the fruits or berries or whatever was on it, it didn't affect the fact that they were aging. So they knew they had now been reduced to mortality status, no longer immortal, so they were going to die. So what they immediately decided to do under Nod's leadership was they started to interbreed. So we have Caligastia's staff, which are 30 males and 30 females. They now start to procreate. So they now are procreating this very advanced race of progeny who were called the Nodites. So now we have even more of these essential, superhuman male and female, except they're no longer, they're no longer immortal, but yet they'd still be these very imposing, immense physical specimens, over 8 feet tall, them and their children, very intelligent because they have all these extra endowments. And these are the Nephilim. These are the Nephilim. These would be, again, perceived as demigods by the primitive humans here. Also, there's a lot of technology that they had. So they started to be able to build the types of structures that we associate, with these monolithic structures all over the place. So when the rebellion happened here, everything goes into retrograde. Again, much knowledge is lost. Here is the region where the first city, the capital of the Caligastia administration, right here, near the Persian Gulf. You can see Uruk and right down there, right around the tip. And what the Urantia Book says is that that city, which they give the name Dalmatia, they said that was the name of that capital city, that it became submerged fairly soon after the rebellion. And it scattered the Nodite people. They migrated north up through Mesopotamia. But there still was a remnant that stayed around, in the area called Samaria of here. So you can see Sumer there, which is the lower part of Mesopotamia. So there were still Nodite settlements down in that area. And these would have been, again, very, very advanced beings relative to the primitive humans. So now we move to the arrival of Adam and Eve. This is, so the arrival of Caligastia, that was the first planetary epoch. They were the first to introduce religion and true religion about the divine order. Now the second planetary epoch is with the arrival of Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve arrived on our planet 37,000 years ago. So more than 150,000 years after the Caligastia betrayal is the arrival of Adam and Eve. They established their headquarters in what was the Garden of Eden, but not the Garden of Eden referred to in the Genesis account. There was a first Eden that came before that, and it was established on a peninsula that went out into the eastern Mediterranean on or near the Syrian coast. I'll show you a map in a minute that kind of gives some ideas of that. So there was the first Garden of Eden, and there they reinstituted the teaching of the universal Father and those 7 moral precepts. And those teachings were embraced by several generations of Adam and Eve's pure line descendants. And you recall, these are the violet race because of this soft, pale violet glow that shined from them. In fact, the whole legends of the halos of the saints is traced back to the fact that Adam and Eve both had this soft, radiant glow around their heads. So when they were wearing clothing, all you would see would be this emanation of soft light around their heads. And with the association that they were, near divine beings, holy beings, it became the tradition that when there were saints, other holy people, that they had the tradition of painting them as having halos. So Adam trained his children in these spiritual precepts so that they could teach the primitive tribes. And many of them actually were sent out as missionaries. Well, things went awry with Adam and Eve as well. As we know from the Genesis account, there was what you might call the fall. But basically what happened was that Caligastia, who was invisible to the humans, but was very visible to Adam and Eve, they had the proper extended spiritual perception to be able to see beings who were in the spiritual realm and those who were in the Urantia form that I mentioned earlier. So they could see angels directly, they could see Caligastia directly. This was not an issue of tempting Eve to eat an apple and then for her to share a bite with her husband. That's not what this was about. It was something much more realistic and much more subtle and something that makes much more sense. And that was this. Caligastia, through his machinations, he introduces Eve to this brilliant young Nodite chief. And over a period of years, they keep talking about how disordered this world is and how long it would take for Adam and Eve to build up this reserve of 1 million pure line violet race descendants. So they're pure line children who eventually were going to be the ones sent out to hybridize and upstep the genetics of all the primitive humans. They projected that would take about 4,000 years for Adam and Eve to procreate, and with the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve continue, they were intermarrying, or they were marrying the sons and daughters because they could do that with no genetic issues or anything like that. But it would take about 4,000 years for them to have 1 million of these direct line, pure-blooded, violet race children to then start the effort to go out among all of the planetary races of primitive humans and start the interbreeding program. And you got to realize that the privilege and honor it would be for a primitive human female to take as her mate one of the sons of Adam and Eve as husband, and for a human male to receive as his bride one of the daughters of Adam and Eve as his wife. Just an incredible privilege and honor to do that. But that was the plan. That's how this long evolutionary plan to upstep the genetic endowments of the primitive human race, so that we become more spiritually aware, more robust physically, resistant to disease, long-lived, all of these characteristics that were for us, they were for our benefit. That got thwarted because eventually these conferences that Eve was having with this Nodite chief, and they gave his name as Cano, C-A-N-O, that what they basically chose to do was to abridge this plan of, waiting to have all of these, 1 million direct line descendants. And they figured, look, if we start this interbreeding now, but between the violet race and the Nodite race, remember the Nodites already being superior, essentially, near superhuman, that they could start and progress the plan much faster, because they would have the full buy-in of all of the Nodite peoples into the Adamic plan, rather than being at odds with each other. So it's almost like the tradition that became later among royal families from different countries. Well, how do you get them to have peace accords? All right, well, you marry a son to a daughter of the different kingdoms. So this was the plan, and it was well intended. But it was a tremendous error. And Adam and Eve had both been warned about departing from the divine plan that was their commission. They'd been warned repeatedly about this. In fact, they say that every time they went to the tree of life to partake of some of the fruits or whatever, there was an angel that was essentially the guardian of that tree of life who would again issue them the caution and the warning that, look, you're on a disordered planet. You have Caligasta here who is just looking for ways to take you off of your path so that you default on your mission. But our world was so disordered, it was so depressing for Adam and Eve to be here, because they're coming from, one of these high mansion worlds, at the local system headquarters, and they're thrown into this kind of like pit of misery here on our planet. And the circuits had been severed, remember, so they didn't have the normal advantage of interplanetary communication. So they were very, very lonely, and they were depressed. And they kept seeing, it was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Every time they tried to do something, impart new knowledge, try to help there's always this fighting going on between the local tribes and all that. And it was just really wearying and depressing for Adam and Eve. So they're like, God, we ever going to be able to get the job done here? So this temptation that was put in front of Eve very cunningly, they were vulnerable to it, and they took the bait. So what happened with the impregnation of Eve by Cano the Nodite caused complete chaos. Adam immediately knew something was wrong, comes to Eve. She tells him in great sorrow. Now, Adam assumed that what would be the consequence is that immediately Eve would be removed from the planet, that some of the higher order beings would come, and that she would have to be removed because of this error. He could not stand the thought of being without his mate. He loved her, deeply, deeply loved her. And they already had already produced, I think it was on the order of 60 children. So they had 60 of their own direct line children there in the first garden. And they had already produced something on the order of, through the 4 generations of children up to this time, there were like 1,600 pure line descendants of the violet race. Well, Adam just couldn't stand the thought of Eve being removed, and likely a lot of their children being removed from the planet as well. He immediately went and sought out a Nodite woman, and he impregnated her. So now he shared in this, they called it just a folly. It was the folly of Adam and Eve. But he knew that he had to share the same consequence, whatever it was. And he also realized this probably meant they were going to lose their immortality status, which indeed happened. So they no longer had access to the tree of life. So now they're reduced to mortal status, and so they were going to die at a certain period. Well, they ended up living for about, I think it says Adam was 530 years, Eve 511 years. But they had to leave the original Garden of Eden, which was on the peninsula. That quickly became overrun with the surrounding tribes, and they made a migration over into the Tigris-Euphrates Valley and established the second garden, which is the one that the Genesis account talks about. And there they try their best to kind of resume as best they can their mission. So there were more children that were born, like another 40 children were born, for a total of 105 to Adam and Eve between their union. And then there were more of their children who were creating a larger pool. But it was, and basically the Cain and Abel story, that whole account refers to what happened with the son who Eve gave birth to from the union with Cano the Nodite. That son was Cain. Okay? So he's the first child she gives birth to in the second garden. Now, her next child is Abel, who was fathered by Adam. So you had Cain, who was half Nodite, half violet, and now you have Abel, who is the progeny of Adam and Eve. So what does Abel do as he's growing up alongside his older brother Cain? Continually baits him and baits him, saying, I'm the true son of Adam, and you're a half-breed. And this goes on and on for quite a long time, and it just gets under Cain's skin to a certain point where he can't take it anymore. He kills his younger brother, Abel. That then results in Adam saying, look, son, who was actually his I guess you'd call him his adopted son, said, you need to go into exile, otherwise you're going to be killed by all of your other brothers and sisters here, because they're not going to tolerate that. So that's why the exile happened. So where does Cain go? He goes to the land of Nod. He went to the nearest Nodite settlement, because there had already been Nodite settlements for over 150,000 years. That's where he goes to get a wife. So now we see here this is the seafloor topography of the Eastern Mediterranean. If you look at the island of Cyprus, which is right out there, and when you follow kind of like the elephant's trunk of Cyprus, look what it points to. It points right to the shore there of the Eastern Mediterranean. And if you look at the seafloor itself, you see a lot of these peninsulas and other things that at one time would have been, above sea level there. Because what they say happened was that after Adam and Eve left the garden, some number of years later, there were some geologic changes. The planet was still doing its normal upheavals and things like that, and that peninsula sunk beneath the sea. And should archaeologists, in their searches, they would eventually find some remnants of the first garden there off the coast there of the Eastern Mediterranean. But they migrated over to the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, as we see there, probably in the little triangle there, kind of in the northern part of Iraq. Okay, very interesting. This is a Wikipedia reference. I found this, a few months ago, and I was astounded by this, because I just put in a Google search about 37,000 years ago human genome, and this is what popped up on Wikipedia. So in 2006, this researcher finds that the gene for brain volume from some archaic human population got introduced into the human DNA. 37,000 years ago. Gene expression for brain volume. This is directly in line with what the Urantia Book says about this. The other thing the Urantia Book says, which we didn't go into because it's more complicated, but they said that because of the default of Adam and Eve, much of the primitive human races that received some of the DNA of the violet race was just concentrated right around the Mesopotamian area and then gradually spread out over migrations over a long time. Unfortunately, there were large segments of the primitive human races that already had isolated themselves in other geographic areas. One race largely separated itself into the Americas, that being the red race. The other race had a large portion of its population isolated down in southern Africa. And so they got very little contribution from the genetic endowment of the violet race. That's what the Urantia Book says. So you see the bottom paragraph basically describes that exactly. So I just propose this seems to be some corroboration of the Urantia Book directly. Okay, the third epical revelation were the teachings of Melchizedek. Melchizedek came 4,000 years ago to our planet, to the site of present-day Salem. He's from a high teacher order called the Melchizedeks, and his job was to resurrect the religion about the 7 moral precepts, as well as the Trinity. Now, for the first time, that concept is introduced to the planet, as well as the teaching of God as the universal creator. And he sent forth emissaries pretty much throughout the known world at that time. He personally taught and mentored Abraham, which is reflected in the Genesis account in the Bible. He also, through his missionaries, heavily influenced other religions. So certainly the Hebrew religion through Abraham, later Moses. The missionaries also contacted eventually Lao Tzu, so Taoism, through Confucius and Confucianism, through Buddha, through Zoroaster. So there was a great influence that came through the missionaries over the years who had originally been taught by Melchizedek. Even Akhenaten, who had introduced monotheism to Egypt, was influenced by the Melchizedek teachings. Well, now we come to the fourth planetary epic, and it was Jesus of Nazareth. So the Creator's Son incarnated on our planet 2,000 years ago, born to this young Jewish couple in Palestine. And he lived a normal life among us, a real human life. He wasn't elevated above the rest. He learned, he had his pains, he had his joys, just like all of us. But he was unique in this. He had a real mission, a real purpose that increasingly dawned on him as he grew older, and he began to become more conscious of his divine nature and his divine identity. And he had consecrated himself to completing his mission. And part of that, along with that mission, was to recruit helpers. And he had not just male disciples, but he also had female disciples. You really don't hear much about that in the biblical accounts. But the women disciples were very, very important in the teaching and healing missions, as well as recruiting patrons for the movement of the teaching. The mission of Jesus was to reveal the love of God and the mercy of God, and to reveal the truth of the brotherhood of men, that we're all children of God, not just some special ones or a chosen people or anything like that. We're all the children of God. His favorite parable that he told repeatedly to emphasize the nature of the Father was the parable of the prodigal son. It's always been my favorite as well. Christianity, according to the Urantia Book, is a religion about Jesus, but not the religion of Jesus. His apostles and disciples were so overwhelmed by the fact of Jesus' crucifixion and his resurrection, the potency of his personal presence, his magnificent and balanced personality, his miracles, the wisdom of his teachings. It's very understandable that being so overwhelmed by that, they felt God in their presence, that they would make teachings about him and focused on him as a personality, rather than carrying on the teachings that were his. So they weren't teaching the religion of Jesus, they were teaching a religion about Jesus. And that was a very early distortion that happened. Jesus simply wanted to have all the peoples of the world recognize that they're children of God. And through simple truths, uplift all the religions, not dominate anyone else or displace them, but to inject them with more truth an enlarged concept of God, and to teach that there's such potency in the faith in God, that it's a dynamic attribute. The faith in God. It's living, it's dynamic, it's real, and it has real effects. Reasons for ET interest in this planet. It's not just about the fact that we now have nuclear weapons and that we now are a spacefaring race. Much more fundamental. Because this planet was so seriously handicapped by the combined effects of the Lucifer rebellion, the Caligastia betrayal, the default of Adam and Eve, the creator son of our local universe looked at our planet and like, wow, now those guys are in this, they're in the sewer. You know, I'm choosing that world for my 7th bestowal. Out of 4 million inhabited planets he could have chosen, he chose this one. It was going to be the toughest assignment. But he knew this was the right planet to bring a technical conclusion to the Lucifer rebellion, even knowing that the effects were going to reverberate for a long time. It is that fundamental fact of the creator son of a local universe of millions of inhabited planets, his incarnation on this planet, that makes us of such great interest to trillions upon trillions of beings all around our inhabited local universe. The other is that ours is a life modification sphere. There's great interest in the fact that there's species of life here that you don't find on other planets. This makes sense. The 5th and final revelation to this point in time is the Urantia revelation that was communicated in the 1920s and 30s by a commission of celestial beings. And it was published as the Urantia Book. I encourage you all to investigate it and find out for yourself whether there's something in there that makes sense the way it's made sense to me. And there will be more to come in the future. I think we're blessed to be on a planet that has so much attention. We have a lot of help coming here in many forms. And I think the experiencers here at this conference have tasted a lot of that assistance in many different forms. And a lot of it's not understandable. It's not understandable right now, but it will be increasingly understandable to us as we go forward. Of this I am certain, though. Jesus was historical. He is real. And his spirit is very present with each one of us. I know that personally. You're invited to receive him in whatever way would make sense to you and see if that benefits you at all. It doesn't matter whether you want to believe or not, the spiritual presence is there with you. And it will always be there with you, just like the indwelling Spirit of the Father is in your mind. And it's there for your good. Thank you.